Hey everybody, welcome to the Monday edition of The Daily Friend. Welcome to the show. We have an interesting one today. Might elicit a few giggles, but before I get into any of that, let me just welcome my panel and colleagues to the studio. We have Maurice Roet, of course, who's the head of campaigns. Maurice, hello.
Morning, Sihle.
And we have Mr. Terence Corrigan. He's also one of our writers and analysts here at the IRR. Terence, good morning.
Morning.
And of course, we have Gabriel Krauser. Notice how I got the name and surname right. Timeously, one of our writers. Morning, Gabriel.
How's it, Sihle?
Guys, let's jump straight into it. And we'll begin in an interesting place because it got a little bit of international attention online with a one Katie Hopkins retweeting this thing and essentially perverting it to an extent. But we'll get into this. So there's this letter from the Rural Development and Land Reform Department in the Northern Cape, speaking about a farm in the Northern Cape that they've clearly bought. It's now a state farm that they're looking to lease out. Now, one of the conditions, the requirements is applicants must be a South African citizen, and then in brackets and in bold it says African as in black, coloured and Indian above the age of 18. It makes no mention, of course, of white South Africans in that. This, of course, has been taken by various vested interest groupings, especially those that trade on race, to be a sign of, on the one hand, the extreme white genocide, and of course, in a more moderate sense, the idea that, and I think a position I take, is that, ever increasingly the obsession with race is seeing opportunities be delineated in very sort of crude racial sense, where you don't have to necessarily do this. Guys, your thoughts on this?
So I think the Northern Cape is an interesting place generally because it seems to have played the role of being a testing ground for some of the government's most radical ideas. You'll remember earlier this year there was a missive coming out of the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform there saying that they'd earmarked, I think it was 43 farms for expropriation without compensation. And I think that remains a far more distressing note than this one. What disturbs me about this is not so much the earmarking of selling the land off to one race group rather than another, but rather, firstly, the fact that it wants to sell the land off in the form of a lease and not in the form of a title deed, which means that it's not altogether clear whether the purchaser will be incentivized to really invest in the land. It doesn't specify how long that lease should be. If it's merely a 2-year lease, for example, which is an established pattern in KwaZulu-Natal, you can check it out on the King's website, then what happens is you've got no real incentive to put up things like fences, to put in sluices, to put in dips for sheep or cattle to be inoculated against various diseases. And without putting in that hard infrastructure, the value of the farm as a going concern, as something to create business, remains very scant. And I've been to several farms, personally, that have been leased out to black holders. And partly because they don't have these incentives and partly because of the ways that the people are chosen who get the thing through nepotism or connections to government officials means that they don't become farms. They become sort of private family resorts, places to go away with the family and kids for a bit of a holiday, where there used to be scores or even hundreds of people employed in season. Now there is only employment for the maid and the babysitter. That's very worrying. That the criteria really should be, is this place going to be creating export goods? Is this place going to be creating employment? Is it going to be good for the economy?
And that's the kicker, isn't it? That's the real kick here. And we'll get back to the racial issue because I think it does play a role in this, in terms of the narrative of how politicians look at black South Africans, generally speaking, that, when there is a quote-unquote opportunity, and it's supposed to go to people who are previously disadvantaged, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, you're giving this person this farm, but on the other hand, you're also not. I mean, they become a renter, a leasee, for the rest of their lives, or however long the duration of this is. And before I just open it up to Terence and Maurice, there's another little provision I want to read here. The applicant must be willing to relocate and stay full-time on the farm for the duration of the lease contract. Now, they don't say how long the lease contract is, but it's neither here nor there, as Gabriel was saying. I mean, who would want to invest in something that they don't own and have the real prospect of an official appearing at your gate and saying, well, you've invested in it, for whatever reason, because we've leased it out to you, we're taking it back. Now, who would want to invest in something like that, guys?
Look, a case could be made that that a long-term lease does is a reasonable standard for a title deed, but that would really hinge on the orientation of the prospective farmer. If this is if this is a business person who is looking at, let's say, making a 30-year investment, then a 99-year lease is adequate. And in some respects, for someone like that, possibly even favourable, because at the end of the day, you can walk away from it. When you've extracted the value that you want. However, this does speak very directly to the government's approach to land redistribution. For about the past decade or so, the policy has been not to confer ownership, to retain land reform beneficiaries on land estate tenants. Now, the reality of this, certainly what we've seen in the Eastern Cape, where quite a bit of research has been done, is that officials are actually reluctant to sign those long-term working leases. You end up with sort of caretaker agreements, which are neither here nor there. You don't have rights to develop it. You kind of have a right to live there, but almost, to choose a horrible phrase, almost as a squatter. As Gabriel says, the position of farm employees then becomes untenable. On the racial aspect, I think that it's interesting to see it expressed like that. Back in the early 90s, when discussion about the constitutionality of race-based measures was being discussed, there always seemed to be this rider that race could never be an overwhelming exclusionary factor. Although perhaps you could say that a measure like land reform, it was always going to be. But I think that what this really does is it generates a large degree of official double standards and hypocrisy. It's not an absolute barrier, but in some cases it is. And I think perhaps what needs to be said about the Northern Cape is that it's an area of the country where there is a relatively small population and
1.1 million people.
Yeah, but more than that, the population, the African population and the extent of African landholding is particularly low, and I think this probably speaks as much as anything to the government's sort of preoccupation with proportions and percentages. It's not the ideal agricultural environment.
That's right.
Very, very large. So I think this is what I'm seeing here is the strong odor of ideology hovering above, what really needs to be a rational and economically planned program of land reform and agrarian development, whose focus should be on farming as opposed to transfers.
Yeah.
If I can just chip in with one thing about the sort of racial exclusionary measure, John Cain Berman, one of our extremely esteemed colleagues, delivered a kind of lecture on the Constitutional Court last year, and he surveyed, I think, 6 or 7 cases that all raised flags independently, but when you put them together, really connect the dots in quite an alarming way. Now, the case that stood out in my mind the most was where the Constitutional Court, under Chief Justice Mogoeng, ruled in the case of a police person applying to be promoted, white woman, there were no black candidates, she was fully qualified. The police then said, no, we're not going to give you the job, we're going to keep the job open until someone else who is a person of color applies for the job. And the Constitutional Court ruled in favor of that decision, basically saying, for some things, it's better to have no one at all than it is to have a white person. That's exclusionary in the extreme. And if you look at our police, which I think we might touch on later, yes, they need all of the hands on deck.
Absolutely. And Morris, just as I look to sort of pivot as I look to move us on to the next issue. Actually, Terence, it's something you were sort of pioneering, and there will be a piece written on this next insert by Terence Corrigan in the Daily Friend. Remember, you can find all our pieces at dailyfriend.co.za. The Matulini Community Association, there are issues, this is in KZN if I'm not mistaken, there are issues of intimidation, violence, and at the thrust of it, or the center of it, is allegations around a land grab. Terence, tell us more.
Right, well, this is interesting and I think very, very revealing. The Matulini Property Association launched a three-phase land claim back in the 1990s, and as from what I understand, as tends to happen with our sclerotic bureaucracy, they've now gone through phase one. There's another 2 phases coming, but there seems to be some dispute with rival claimants. The details are sketchy, but the kernel of what concerns me now is that last week, the managers of one of the farms, which is apparently under the control of this community property association, was accosted, thrown in a fire, attempts was made to burn him to death.
Sure.
He's refusing to talk about it, but the sense is that there's a rival group that is trying to commandeer the control of the area, and the government has been approached to deal with this. There's been appeals to the police. It appears there's some sort of blockage of access to the properties happening, and very little seems to have been done about it. Now, one of the trustees or spokesman, who's an IFP MP, is saying, well, he hopes now that there's been this level of violence and this blockage, this will wake the authorities up. Now, why this? One of the reasons why this jumped out at me is that this seems to be almost a picture-perfect replay of what happened at the Andersons farm in Donnybrook earlier this year. Also, a farm being blockaded. Police saying, well, they're not really in a position to serve warrants and whatever. State not doing its job, and the element that's able to exert the most raw power, being able to set the agenda. Now, in that instance, it all seemed to center around the fact that a few Zimbabweans were being employed by that farm, and I think what concerns me is that we're in a society where there is a great deal of anger, where there's a great deal of ease of resorting to force. We have people in senior positions in politics and governance that indulge in the most reckless baiting. Where does calling a white farmer a land thief, or a dispute between rival claimants to land, between xenophobia, all these things kind of blend together. It's very difficult to say, well, we identify one enemy group and we all target our venom in that direction. Once you've legitimized this type of politics, and KwaZulu-Natal, unfortunately, has a history of very physical politics. It's going to be very, very difficult to contain, and I think that should give pause to those people who indulge in this kind of reckless nationalist, race baiting. It doesn't. What starts there doesn't stop there.
Yeah, and I want to bring in Gabriel here, because we've actually chatted about a similar case, but a different one, about the state's sheer failure to protect property rights. And in this case, it's the usual dichotomy, as Terence was bringing up, black, white, and etc. But there has been a case of a black individual who was a property owner, but was essentially not protected by the state. Do you want to just quickly remind us on that?
Yeah, so in Nkutuleni, which is down in KZN, close to Malmeth, sort of relatively close to Nkandla, there was a black family, a series of families. They were Lutheran Zulus. They were not royalists. They'd never been part of kind of royal Zulu kingdom. And they had initiated in the 90s a land claim, again, a kind of three-phase thing. Some white lefties came in there to try ostensibly to help them, but in fact only ended up frustrating the process. Eventually, by the time the title deed was coming along on its way, Chief Tandazani Zulu, who's a sort of notorious guy in various other respects, has been accused of trying to hire assassins to intimidate his opponents, identified some mining interests going on under that land, made a move, said, I'm going to kill you guys if you don't allegedly made a move to say, I'm going to kill you guys if you don't give me the rights to this land. They called the police to say no. These people are coming to drive us out on Sunday. So on Sunday morning, the police arrive and the impi arrives at the same time. And the police don't drive the impi away. The police says to Walter Mnyandu, William Mnyandu, their family, and Charles Nkomalo and his family, get in the van. We're taking you away from your land. Walter dies in hiding. Charles and Phumzile's daughter's wedding was going to be that Friday. The wedding dress is stolen. The meat, the nyama and the booze were all used for the impi to celebrate their new great victory. They all go into hiding. They get the title deed in hiding. They say to the mayor, here's our title deed. Help us get back to our land. If we go there, we're going to be killed. No help at all. Many promises, no help at all. It's a terrible story. And there's another copy paste in Kranskorp where a white guy was accused of disrupting some graves, and so there was a blockage, and the police didn't come, and there's burning down of farmhouses, petrol bombing. And again, the people at the front lines of this are his farm workers who are black, who want to protect their farm because this is their place of business, and they know if it goes down, they're not getting income the next month, and they are having machetes waved in their face and fires lit in their face and being told you're impimpi or what, something like equivalent to that. Police are nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, Maurice, I'll get you just in a quick. This weekend I was in Free State, Bloemfontein. It was a literary festival at the University of Free State, and I was on a panel discussion on the issue of farm murders. But I purposefully broadened the conversation to say, it's not just about the farm murders; it's also about the assault on people's property rights and the crimes of property crimes, if you will, where an individual comes, works on a piece of land. Gets to own that piece of land, but a thug, someone who has more weapons or a bigger mob behind him, steals their equipment, harasses them, all because they want something out of the individual, and the state does nothing to protect these individuals, and that's a big problem.
Agri-SA said 70. They did a survey. 70% of farmers said last year they experienced crime in 1 year.
That's ridiculous, Maurice. I'll come to you now, Terrence. Maurice,
so I just want to say, I think this is part of a broader breakdown of the rule of law in South Africa.
Absolutely.
Trucks can't even drive down to Durban from Joburg anymore, and we've seen construction companies, they go start building whatever, then the local thug arrives and says he wants 10 or 15% of the cut.
RET group,
exactly. And then, there are these guys who've worked in Iraq, and they say it's easier to work in Iraq than it is to work in South Africa.
That's crazy.
So, and I just also the civil engineering magazine is apparently closing down after 55 years, and I read the editorial. Guys were saying this is the worst that they can remember the industry has been in their lifetimes.
That's insane.
That's something we need to,
Terrence?
Well, we a great deal of attention is paid to violent crime in South Africa. But the damage that is inflicted on agriculture through property crime, stock theft, for instance, cases where cattle is being taken from the sort of Bergville area in KwaZulu-Natal to feedlots and auction stands in Standerton. I mean, it's
sophisticated.
It's sophisticated. Being trafficked into Lesotho and also the other way. There's also concerns about crop theft. I mean, this isn't someone taking a few mealies for a bribe. This is like literally going clearing.
Harvesters coming in and taking your stuff.
Now, the damage to the commercial viability of the industry, and these are crimes that I think escape a lot of attention because the incentives of people engaging in them are actually generally not to be violent. You want to make off with the
loot, so to speak,
with the goods. So it's often done at night, but it's damaged defences. Speaking to one farmer who was involved with the local sort of security forum, he said they actually get on fairly well with the stock theft unit. They know these guys are actually trying their best, but they don't have quad bikes, they don't have helicopters, they don't have they don't have trucks. So they can actually cost someone moving stolen cattle, but they can't return them because there's nothing to transport them on. And the proportional damage that does to smaller scale or emerging farmers, guys who actually have maybe obtained some land through the land reform program and are still in the early stages, you can destroy a guy's livelihood by walking off with the cattle.
And Gabriel, that's maybe as a last gasp. That's the real issue, isn't it? You cannot build a property owning and a prosperous society if you're not looking after people's ability to say, actually, this piece of land that I've fenced off is mine. And really, we speak about the individual a lot as liberals, but really we're a family society, and often land ownership takes the form of a family. For them to say, we work this, we put in effort, and the proceeds fund whatever we need to do as a family, better education, better health, and blah, blah, blah. But if you're not looking after property rights, none of that can happen, can it?
Yeah, it really can't. And I think just, as a last gasp on this, it is about farming and crop theft and stock theft and all kinds of intimidation, all the money that you also end up bleeding, not just because of the assets that you lose, but to replace the goods, to hire people to go and traffic the things, to dig a moat around the insurance premiums. But it's not just about farming, it's the whole country. Thomas Piketty is this, I think he's quite an incredible ultra lefty, but he did one very smart thing. He said, if you really want to look at an economy, the first thing you must look at is the capital to income ratio. How much wealth has been accumulated versus how much wealth do you generate every year? GDP versus total capital generated. And in every country, after a war, after World War II, after a major civil war, after a major crisis, it goes down to about 2 to 1. That's about as low as you can go. Twice as much accumulated wealth as GDP. And then it climbs up quite quickly to 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 6 to 1, 7 to 1, 8 to 1, even 9 to 1. When you see Japan, Spain, countries like that. In South Africa, it's been at 2 to 1 for the last 45 years. This wealth country does not accumulate in this country. It just gets stolen.
Guys, let's firstly, very lively conversation. Guys, remember, you can find a lot of this analysis, you can find these pieces on the Daily Friend. Always log on, dailyfriend.co.za, like and share the material as wide as possible. I know that piece on the Matulini Community Property Association will be coming out. Look out for that. And probably some other thoughts from other colleagues that, even to refresh previous pieces. Guys, last one to end off with. It's a bit of a funny one, but not really. A bit lighthearted, but also quite serious, as I said. Phumzile van Damme. Now, quick recap. She's a Democratic Alliance MP, very vocal online, very polarizing online. A couple of weeks back, if it wasn't, comes out and says, look, I was verbally abused and racially abused at the V&A waterfront, a very sort of lofty tourist attraction in Cape Town, by this family, a white family, who called me, or rather insinuated that they were looking at me in a threatening way because she is black, her words, and that she wasn't protected by the V&A and blah, blah, blah. Now, usually because race is such a sensitive issue in this country, the V&A, being a corporation, didn't want any of this on their hands, so they were very quick to, apologize and capitulate and say, no, we're really sorry. Even though there's no real evidence or data or even a footage of this event, we're sorry. We're sorry. Which is corporate SA. That's literally like your slogan. Corporate SA. We're sorry. Anyway, so, and basically there was also a bit of a raucous online when Helen Ziller basically said, but we haven't seen the other side of the story. And a lot of people saying, so it wasn't just Helen. And then she goes into the Latin principle of, there's two sides of every story, and
innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely, and that's how you evaluate a situation. Now we actually do get the other side of the story. A family has come forward. The family, has come forward through their attorney, and has actually said, look, at no point do we racially abuse this woman. She cuts into it, and I won't go into the whole details, guys. You can read it. It's on News 24, I think. But the gist of it is, the story, according to them, is Phumzile cut into a line at one of the retail stores there. They basically had a bit of words, say, hey, why are you doing that? And she then escalated it into this situation that we now have play out. But the real issue here, aside from the two-story thing we spoke about, is, and Terence, you sort of bring it up early on, is that, we still haven't really seen real evidence. It's still their word against theirs. Where's the footage, the video footage, Terence?
Yeah, look, in that account, and just looking at Ms. Van Damme's own account, the only person who seems to have acted, where it is confirmed, acted in an untoward manner was herself in slugging. Now she says, well, the people that were looking at her in a threatening manner or whatever. Look, one could at least start to get some sense of it if one could see security footage. But I think what this gets at is a very very grave matter. The assertion that that something as in this country as serious as racial abuse is alleged, I think that needs to be meticulously recorded and investigated. I think that, in as much as we want to disincentivize racist and abusive behavior, I think that there's also a duty on those alleging it to have their kind of ducks in a row. Now, something that left me with some distress was her comment that you are invalidating my experience. Well, no one is invalidating anything. However, she is a public figure who has made a very grave allegation. One would hope that someone in that position is providing an example to the citizens who have, at least indirectly, appointed her to be one of their leaders. And I think that it is in the nature of the concept of accountability and of a democratic society that one shouldn't that one should question the behavior and the rationale of those who exercise authority. Mm-hmm. So the fact that she has made a claim does not merely means that she has made a claim and represented what she claims to be her experience. When Jacob Zuma did that all the time, and certainly her party, and I think probably she herself, often took that with a large grain of salt. So yes, given the position that she holds in society, I don't think that is a reasonable response.
Sorry, Mo. Gabriel?
Yeah, I think it's also important to test when you have a witness. You've got a character witness too. You've got a witness whose character you can check against the claim that's being made. Is Phumzile van Damme a credible witness when it comes to allegations of racism? I argue no. That's not to say that in this case it didn't happen. A broken clock can be correct, but it is to say that she's an incredible witness. Why do I say this? I say this because earlier this year, in the build-up to the 2019 election, the DA had a very serious sort of beginnings of a debate about BEE policy versus a policy that looks at disadvantage directly rather than via the proxy of race. And Phumzile van Damme seems to have been one of those actors who was saying, no, you must have some kind of race-based policy. She went further. She went to say, Gwen Ngwenyo is the head of policy at the DA at the time. She was a former colleague at the Institute of Race Relations. She wrote an article for Politics Web that I think elaborated a story that was very close to everyone's hearts at the time because we were experiencing load shedding, about how CADA deployment, the mask of BEE, and Eskom load shedding all are part of the same kind of. There's a pattern there, there's a logic there. The one thing gets abused in order to get the other thing to happen, and that ends up meaning the electricity doesn't work anymore. It was a serious analysis. It was a detailed analysis. It went into the history of policy, into various, sort of going back decades, into particular personalities as well. It was very, very good. Phumzile van Damme's way of thinking about this thing is to write a tweet, 140 characters, that says, if you think BEE has anything to do with Eskom's failure, then you must be a racist, because you must have this idea that black people are too inferior to be able to do the job. This is divisive language. It's unhelpful. It's not addressing the facts of the matter. And really, it's a way of saying either you agree with me or you're a racist.
You're invalidating your experience.
Now, 80% of this country, indicated by our surveys, think that job appointments should not be made on the basis of race. They should be based on the basis of merit. So according to Phumzile van Damme, 80% of this country is racist. So when she goes to the V&A waterfront, it's not just that family. It's pretty much everyone who she thinks is a racist. In this sense, I don't think she's a credible lone witness when it comes to allegations of racism. So if video evidence comes forward and it turns out this family is waving sticks at her and pointing guns at her and mouthing awful slurs, then I think we have evidence to think that the broken clock was correct.
Absolutely.
But she is a broken clock.
One last thing, and Maurice, I'll bring you in on this one because we were having a chat offline about this, and I was saying it's been fascinating to watch, though, how politicians who are so used to, especially parliamentarians, who are so used to the spectre of political grandstanding, have essentially suggested or are surprised when ordinary families don't play that game. So, for example, if you remember at the time of Phumzile blowing this up, she's saying, yeah, the family must come out now with their supposed video, blah, 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 very sassy, and, and I remember thinking, but ordinary people are not like that. For them, this would have been, let's assume it wasn't racial for a moment, and if it was racial, don't get me wrong, she's very right to be as upset as she is. But the point I'm making is, let's assume it wasn't racial. It was just a matter of Phumzile pushing it into a line, or maybe the family pushed into a line, I don't know. That's why we need the evidence. And had a bit of a spat, and it was over. Most people are going to be like, that was such a trashy moment. I'm trying to find non-swearing language and move on. But for politicians, no, the spectre must play out in the public eye, so they're seen in some sort of venerating way. Morris?
Most, like we said earlier, most people will be like, geez, there was somebody who was such an arsehole at the V&A waterfront today, and they'll just move on and like, oh, geez, that person was horrible to me, and then move on. But also, I think Phumzile has got what she did, she took photos of that family, put it onto her Twitter, and said, and in South Africa, there are real consequences now for being racist. Or look at Adam Katzavelos, look at Vicky Momberg. Adam Katzavelos has ruined his life.
Which Vicky Momberg,
of course, 100%. Yeah. But you can't go take photos of people and say they are racist.
And there's no evidence.
Katzavelos and Momberg were caught on video saying the K word. Obviously, there we go, bam. But these other people, Phumzile just took photos of them, said they were racist. And that can have real consequences for these people. Maybe their employment. Sure, if they were racist, then they must face consequences, but there's no evidence whatsoever that they did do anything. And just because a black person and a white person disagree in South Africa, maybe come to start saying some harsh words to each other, that doesn't mean they...
It's a racial racist incident.
Phumzile claims that this family went to them and said, we were ugly to you because you're bleak. Yeah. And I can't believe, unless you are a time traveler from 1980 or been in a coma for 30 years, unless you are actually... one of the worst kinds of racists in the world, you will go say it to a black South African today in South Africa.
Start the car, Marty. We're going back.
The sad thing is that these people do pop up from time to time.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But I think it's it's so rare though. Now, when you do have a Katzavelos or a Momberg, it's so it is all over the media because it's a dog bites man story, not a man bites dog story. It's actually so rare these days that it happens. I mean, that's not to say that racism doesn't exist. And it's not a problem in South Africa, of course. But as our survey that Gabriel referenced earlier has shown, that is not the most pressing issue for the vast majority of South Africans. Yeah.
And I think, Cecily, I think you raised an interesting idea that I think our viewers should think about and all South Africans should think about. We know what a racist slur looks like. Using certain words, saying certain things, it's just uncontroversial. This is a racist slur. I think we must start to consider the possibility that a knowingly false accusation of racism is also racist, especially if you're targeting a minority group that's vulnerable and you know this person wasn't racist, but you say they were, so that the hounds will be unleashed in the media and in their communities and at work. Is it not also racist? I think it is.
And I think that's what the family, if you read this piece, and I'm not going to promote the news site, but just it's on the news site. It's on the news, sorry, rather. One of the comments that, I took out was the family suggests that they're not going to lay a charge against Van Damme because, quote, out of fear of intimidation. Now, again, as we said, none of us have the evidence. So maybe they were racist, maybe they weren't. It's irrelevant. I think that what's really relevant is this family felt as though that maybe if they weren't racist, or if let's assume they weren't racist, the ton of bricks that would fall on an ordinary family that do not look for the limelight, like a politician, for example, would be so much that the consequences for them are real. Losing a job, being, even if they were proven to have been not racist after the fact, right? It becomes irrelevant. You become cast as you are that individual, like the Adam Katzavelos, like the Vicky Mombergs, etc., etc.
And your kids at school will be humiliated.
Absolutely.
Which they never should be. Even if you are racist, your kids are innocent.
It speaks to the need for, just to bring it back and maybe tie it up, it speaks to the need for incidents like these to be evidence-driven, number one, and to be reported in a manner which is actually quite responsible, so to speak. So that it becomes a good thing, and as it always should be, but it becomes how do one put this? It becomes a easier thing, if I can call it that, to report these incidents because there are proper channels to do it, and then people can be caught out if they are racist, and that's what we do want. We do want to catch out people for being assholes. Anyway, guys. We've chatted long enough. Let me thank all of you guys for this Monday edition. We're kicking off the week with a nice spirited conversation. If you guys are enjoying the content, you enjoy what we do here, remember to support the Daily Friend, to support the IRR by becoming a friend of the IRR. That's our crowdfunding campaign. You can join hundreds of other South Africans who are donating every month to our work to keep it going, to see the analysis on the Daily Friend website. You become a friend of the IRR, of course, by SMSing your name to 32823, and the SMS will cost you R1, and terms and conditions to apply. But if you don't like SMSs and you like more efficient ways of doing things, hip and happening, that's how I know some of you guys are, then find us online at irr.org.za /join, and you can sign up a monthly debit order that way. Guys, remember to watch out for The Daily Friend. We come out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, the show that is. And you can find our writing every day on the Daily Friend website. Remember to look out for the Big Liberty Show this week as I bring you a very special insert with Mike Schussler. We're discussing the issue of your pension. Is it at risk? Find out on the Big Liberty Show this week, and we'll see you on the Daily Friend on Wednesday.